Shallan Davar is one of the hardest characters to encapsulate and understand within the confines of just one video. Unlike Kaladin, she has multiple aspects to what make her the person she is, and unlike Dalinar, she finds it harder to move on from her past due to how she's lied to herself about it and how she's hidden parts of her past from herself. Despite this, I will still attempt to summarize and analyze Shallan's character to the best of my abilities. If you haven't yet seen my video on Kaladin, I highly recommend you do so after finishing this video. Shallan Davar is the only daughter of a small noble house in Jar Kaved. Along with her brothers, she lived a childhood of fear and abuse at the hands of her unstable father. In her younger years, she witnessed the killing of her mother, which had a profound psychological effect on her. For a very long time, she withdrew into herself and made herself forget about what had happened. She lied to herself so well that she began to completely believe the lies and forget what had really happened. This act of lying to herself would not be the first time she warps her own memory. Later in her life, her father had become far more abusive and malicious. He regularly beat her stepmother and the servants in the house. He raised his hand to her brothers and even disowned her eldest brother after an argument. Her father would never raise a hand against Shallan though, but whenever she displeased him, he would take out his anger on others and would beat servants because of her actions. This made her pull even further into herself and avoid doing anything that would cause her father to become angry. And when her father finally died, she even started lying to herself to avoid thinking about it. Shallan made a habit of blocking out any traumatic events and covering up the holes with deeply rooted lies she told herself. This nature of relying on lies even manifested itself in her personal relationships. Her entire relationship with Yasna started through a lie and an attempt at stealing from the older woman. On her road to the war camps in Words of Radiance, she also lies to gain followers and supporters. So I think it's safe to say that a major part of Shallan's personality and arc as a character has to do with lies and truths. She becomes a master of manipulating the truth and convincing thoroughly with a lie. But another aspect of her is that she is fragile. All her actions and convictions stem from a deep sense of fragility. Allow me to explain. Shallan went through an extraordinarily rough childhood and faced things most children would completely break from seeing. She was always made to feel small and powerless in the face of her abusive father. Is it any wonder that she developed a deeply fragile personality? When a person undergoes trauma, how that trauma is handled greatly determines the manner in which that person goes about their lives and how they interact with the world. Kaladin, for example, took the blame on his shoulders and decided the best way to cope with his trauma would be to protect everyone and avoid something like that ever happening again. Dalinar decided to take control of himself and hold himself to a higher standard to avoid future mistakes. Shallan, unfortunately, was far too young to make decisions like that when she had to. She did not have the strength needed to properly deal with her trauma. All she could do as a young child was cower in fear and make herself forget about it in order to avoid having to face these problems. While a completely understandable response and coping mechanism in a child, it did have some profound consequences for her personality. She became extremely fragile. She would shut off and hide at the slightest provocation. She would retreat into herself at the drop of a hat and would avoid causing any problems by essentially walking on eggshells. The only way she knew to avoid pain and struggle was to instinctively retract and hide from it at every potential opportunity. Because of this, she never learned how to strengthen herself and become resilient enough to recover from these events. She never learned the proper coping mechanisms, and thus she never tempered her emotional fortitude against the real world. It's only later in life that she finally became good enough at lying that she managed to protect herself by telling herself nothing was wrong. And even then, she still allowed herself to remain fragile. A large part of Shallan's arc is the fact that she suffers from dissociative identity disorder. Shallan has multiple personalities she created to help her cope with her trauma and make sense of the world around her. This is the peak manifestation of her lying to herself, as whenever she has to deal with something that could shatter her fragile emotional state, her alter ego can take over and protect her. The first personality we meet is Vale. Veil starts off innocently enough as a disguise she uses to help her infiltrate the Ghostbloods. This disguise eventually develops a personality along with it, until Veil is a completely different and independent personality within Shallan's mind. At first she takes over completely against Shallan's will, but after a while they eventually come to an agreement and work in a more symbiotic relationship. Despite the initial misunderstanding, Veil doesn't want to hurt Shallan. She understands that she was created to protect and help Shallan against the external forces she was up against, as well as the internal struggles she was coping with. Veil cares for Shallan, and she takes over whenever Shallan is unable to deal with what is happening, which happens quite often. For a long time it is just Veil and Shallan sharing a mind. Veil helps Shallan deal with the dark underworld and the shadowy organization she has to work with and work against. But at some point, Shallan is also forced to deal with more demanding and high-intensity situations that would require a warrior's constitution. And in true Shallan fashion, she develops a personality to help her cope with that as well. The next personality is called Radiant. Radiant immediately starts off as a willing personality in the agreement that she will help Shallan deal with and cope with things that she isn't able to on her own. Radiant is a warrior and has an inner strength to her that Shallan and Veil lack. She's honorable and headstrong, a perfect counter to Veil, who can be fickle and conniving. The three, Veil, Radiant and Shallan, start working together to help Shallan cope and deal with everything life throws at them, especially as more and more of Shallan's past comes to haunt her. They help her deal with not only her fragility but also her fear. Shallan is essentially a character ruled by fear. As I hope I've been able to properly demonstrate in my previous point, Shallan is a character completely ruled by fear. She's afraid of what is to come, and what has been. This is why she has developed alternate personalities to help her cope with the world. It's completely understandable, of course. All the childhood trauma she underwent made her a naturally fearful character. She was small and powerless against greater forces she could do nothing against. All she could do was cower in fear and retreat into herself in the hopes that she will make it out of the situation in one piece. In the latest book, Rhythm of War, we see how Shallan is regularly faced by things that mean she would have to acknowledge her past and deal with it in order to move on. Unfortunately, this causes her a lot of fear and pain, to the point where she returns to her old tricks of retreating into herself. She forces one of her alters to take over while she hides and avoids any further potential pain. Her alters are like a shell of a tortoise. They are the shield or shell that protects her whenever she needs to, and just like a tortoise, she retracts and encloses herself within that shell in order to avoid harm. Fear has led her to using her alternate personalities to shield her from harm. But despite the fear and the fragility, and even the coping mechanism in using alternate personalities to protect her, Shallan isn't actually completely helpless. She's resourceful and ambitious. She has goals and she goes for them as best she can. Shallan has some extreme coping mechanisms, yes. She does a few questionable things and avoids pain in some odd ways, yes, but this doesn't stop her from still being proactive and pursuing her goals. In fact, it's quite the opposite. I think her ways of dealing with difficulties despite her fragility and fear is quite admirable. She might not have the best ways of dealing with things, but she does deal with them. It's quite a different path from Kaladin, where Kaladin would be overcome by a deep depression and be unable to really do anything. Shallan funnels and focuses her issues in a way to serve her purposes. She has tough and dark days, but she still pushes on regardless. She still aims towards her goals even if things are difficult. She becomes Yasna's ward. She makes her own way to the war camps and infiltrates the Ghostbloods. She gains and gathers information to help and protect the people she cares about, all while she's still dealing with her fear and fragility. She pushes towards her goals regardless, and she uses whatever tools she has at her disposal to do so. In my view, this is quite admirable. One would expect to see a character like this just succumb and give in. But Shallan is tenacious, and she doesn't let things get in her way just because they're tough to deal with. She proves that not only is she strong, but she's also very brave. Shallan deals with her issues and uses her alter personalities to face the struggles she has to deal with on a daily basis. She has an inner strength to her that even Kaladin admires. When they're trapped in the chasms and facing the full wrath of the High Storm, Shallan tells Kaladin of the life she's led. She tells him of her struggles and downfalls. Kaladin listens to all of this and is in awe of her. He realizes that she's dealt with a life just as bad as his, if not worse, yet she still smiles. She's still full of energy and can face the world despite the darkness. She has an inner strength that he wishes he had. Shallan is a fundamentally strong character, and beyond that she's incredibly brave as well. She is ruled by fear and faces it on a nearly daily basis from the time that she's a very young girl. But that's the key here. Yes, she retreats into herself and copes through her alter egos, but she doesn't run away. She faces it nonetheless. And at the end of the latest book, she faces her difficult past directly without the need to have her alter personality take over. She faces the darkness and equips herself with tools to better face and deal with the struggles she's facing. Instead of running and always avoiding her problems, she faces them. And when she does try to avoid these issues, Vale and Radiant continue to urge her to face it and move on from it. Shallan has to stand up against the demons in her own mind. She not only has the strength to continue fighting and moving on, but she has the courage to keep doing so despite how much fear she feels. As I mentioned at the beginning, Shallan is a tough character to encapsulate in a single video. I could probably talk about her for hours on end, but if I had to summarize it, I think I can say Shallan is a very fragile and fearful character, but that she also deals with her fear courageously, tenaciously, and with a deep inner strength. Shallan manages to use her mental problems to her advantage and to help her heal from her past traumas. And I think that's what makes her one of the most compelling characters in the Stormlight archive. But as always, those are just my opinions. I'd love to hear what you guys think about it. Please remember to leave a comment down below and subscribe if you'd like to see more. But that has been all from me for now. Thank you very much for watching, and I will see you next time.